Fourth Avenue to Techwood Drive, O'Leary to Key. It's WreckTalk.
What is going on, everyone, and welcome to WreckTalk. This is complete madness and craziness. First, let me tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to go through the current standings and who teams have left to play in pivotal games. Then we're going to talk about who has the strongest strength of opponent record in the conference. Then who has the weakest, of the contenders who has the strongest, of the contenders who has the weakest. And then we're going to go through some scenarios. So welcome to WreckTalk. I do want to say I said in the last video that this is the dumbest system ever. I actually have kind of changed my mind on that. I think the SEC tiebreak rules work exactly the same. In situations where you have like Georgia Tech, Virginia, Louisville with all one loss, Georgia Tech should not just clearly go because they didn't play either of the other two teams, even though Virginia would have beat Louisville head-to-head. Like, Georgia Tech should not be rewarded for not playing the other two teams, right? So you got to look at it a different way. I need to take a second to tell you, hey, if your team's on the outside looking in because they have a stinky strength of opponent record, you don't have to. Now, I shaved my mustache, but King's Ransom has other products too. I'm a big fan of the King's Ransom Cologne Fighter. Georgia Tech has one of the worst opponent strengths of record. It's stinking it up, but I don't have to stink. You can go to King's Ransom, USA.com today. You can use promo code WreckTalk, and you can be smelling nice yourself. Have the ladies notice you. They're the official sponsor of WreckTalk, started by a Georgia Tech chemical engineering graduate. Back to the video. But I did want to say that. So current rankings, obviously Virginia, number one, with no losses. Now, they still have Wake, at Duke, Virginia Tech left to play. I think their toughest game is at Duke. I do think they lose another game, and I do think that it's at Duke, which gets interesting if Duke wins out. That's one scenario we'll look at. However, Virginia Tech is the game they cannot lose if they're going to lose one game. Virginia Tech is a common opponent between Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Virginia. And in a scenario that you have a 3-game tie, they get kicked out if they lose that game. Looking ahead a little. Georgia Tech, 5-1 with a loss to NC State. They still have to go at BC, which they should win, and a really tough game in Atlanta against Pitt. I'm just going to tell you, I think Pitt's playing the best football in the conference. And unfortunately for Georgia Tech, that's the game. That's a must-win game for them. Georgia Tech's definitely out if they take another loss. I talked with Pigskin Pete. He was saying, well, it's either Pitt or Louisville. However, I think Pitt's quarterback Hensel is much better than Miller Moss. So I'll give the edge to Pitt there. Pitt has probably the toughest out. They've got at Georgia Tech and Miami. They also play Notre Dame. Now, I highlighted that in green because I'm not saying they do beat Notre Dame, but they definitely could beat Notre Dame. I think that would really help get another ACC team in the playoffs. I think if you're going to get two ACC teams in the playoffs, Pitt's got to beat Notre Dame, right? Because that throws Notre Dame completely out of the playoffs. We're not even going to talk about how stupid it is that Notre Dame's ranked 10th with 2 losses, one of them being to Miami. Louisville, 4-1 in the conference. They have 3 games left. They've got Cal, Clemson, at SMU. Now, Clemson is a common opponent with them in Georgia Tech, but they already have 1 loss, so we're not going to think about that. SMU, 4-1. They still have at Boston College, Louisville, at Cal left. You would think Louisville beats SMU. Obviously, if Louisville loses either to Clemson or SMU, they're out. And then Duke has Virginia, at UNC, and Wake left. Again, things get interesting if Duke wins out as well. Okay. Now, we'll go into what I assumed as far as records. So, like, I have some checks here just to make sure that these things add up and it's possible that you could even have these records. Right here, I'm assuming UVA takes 1 loss at Duke. I think that's reasonable. For these scenarios, I'll assume, or for this next scenario, I'll assume Georgia Tech wins out with their only loss to NC State, though I think Pitt very well could beat them. If I was a betting man, I would probably pick Pitt to beat Georgia Tech in Atlanta. We'll see what happens. I've got Pitt losing to Georgia Tech, Louisville winning out, SMU losing to Louisville, Duke losing to Wake, and beating UVA. What else do we have happening? The only other thing that I think is really important is I'm assuming FSU loses out, which I don't think happens. You'll see why I'm doing that. Now, if we look at this, the strongest opponent record in the conference is Virginia Tech, actually. Their opponents winning 61%. Then it's Syracuse, their opponents winning at 58%. Then Wake, their opponents winning at 54%. Of contenders, it's not even close, and it's not going to matter how much I change this up, really. Louisville at 53%. Any scenario where there's not common opponents and a three-way tie, Louisville's is the first one in. Duke at 48%, Pitt then at 45%, and UVA and Georgia Tech are tied at 42%. If and only if, well, I can't say only if, but if Florida State doesn't win another game. UVA plays Florida State, so Florida State winning helps Virginia, and it hurts Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech needs Clemson to win a lot of games, and they need Florida State to lose a lot of games. Georgia Tech also needs NC State to win a lot of games. In other words, it is completely possible and maybe likely that how many games Florida State wins going out determines whether Georgia Tech gets kicked out or not, and ultimately who goes to the conference title game. If you assume that Florida State wins at least one other game, then it changes things. Louisville still of the contenders with the best opponent record at 51.5%. Duke and Pitt are tied, though, at 47%. Then it's UVA at 44%, and Georgia Tech's first out in any scenario where these teams are tied at 41%. So, who has the crappiest record? I think it's Georgia Tech. It's either Georgia Tech or Louisville, depending on whether Florida State wins another game or not. First scenario we're going to look at. First scenario. We're going to look at if we have a three-way tie between Virginia, Georgia Tech, and Louisville. Now, let's see here. All with one loss. We're assuming Duke beats Virginia in this scenario, but loses to Wake. We're assuming Georgia Tech wins out, and we're assuming Louisville wins out. Their only common opponent is Virginia Tech. So, if in this scenario, a three-way tie between Virginia, Louisville, and Georgia Tech, if the one loss that Virginia takes is the Virginia Tech, they're the first out, Georgia Tech and Louisville go to the ACC title game. If they lose to anyone else and Florida State doesn't win another game, then Louisville's definitely in, and it's going to come down to Virginia or Georgia Tech, and they will have a dead tied opponent record at like 42%. Then it goes to, what is it? The team rating metric by Sports Source Analysis, which isn't public. That's what would decide who goes between Virginia and Georgia Tech, and I don't know anything about it. If FSU wins another game, and all else equal for what I'm assuming, right? Like that NC State goes 4-4 or whatever. Then Georgia Tech's left out. You have a rematch of Virginia and Louisville in the ACC title. Again, a lot of other things could happen. Like if Florida State wins another game, but so does NC State, like they upset, I think they've got Miami left or something, right? Then again, it's a dead even. So again, if you're Georgia Tech, you need Florida State to lose the rest of their games. You need Clemson to win because they don't play Virginia. You need NC State to win. That would be so weird if NC State kicked them out because they went on a tear on their way out. And they're not counted in Virginia's strength of record, even though they played them. That could happen too. But the point being Georgia Tech's in a bad way. Georgia Tech's in a bad way here. So let's give that a synopsis. If Virginia loses, if their one loss is to Virginia Tech, they're out in this scenario with Louisville. Louisville's definitely in. Most likely Georgia Tech's out, depending on a few. Georgia Tech needs some help. Let's say it comes down to Virginia, Pitt, and Louisville. So let's say Pitt wins out. They beat Georgia Tech. Louisville wins out. Their only loss is to Virginia. And then Virginia's only loss is to Duke. Then what happens? There's no common opponents between any of these teams. All right. Also, in this scenario, with what I've assumed here, you can look at all their records. Now Pitt and Virginia are tied for strength of record. All right. So again, in this scenario, Florida State could very well decide who goes between Georgia Tech and Pitt, and Virginia, or Georgia Tech and Virginia, and Pitt and Virginia. All right. So if FSU wins 2 or more games, then you get a rematch of Louisville and Virginia. Pitt gets left out. Otherwise, I guess the sports metric analytics things, whatever, would choose between who goes between Pitt and UVA. So that's kind of crazy. All right, let's say it's Georgia Tech, Louisville, Duke, Virginia. All right. So let's say Virginia loses to Duke, Georgia Tech beats Pitt, Louisville wins out, and Duke wins out. So you have now a 4-way tie for first. Then what happens? Well, obviously, with more and more teams added, the likelihood of having a common opponent goes down. There's no common opponents between all of these schools. Okay? No one's beat all the other teams. No one's lost to all the other teams, etc. Georgia Tech's the first out. They have the lowest opponent winning percentage at 42%. Then you start the process over. Then it would be Virginia, Duke, Louisville, and Virginia would be the second out. They have the second worst opponent strength of record, and you would have a Duke-Louisville ACC title in this scenario. What if Virginia's undefeated? All right. Virginia's undefeated. Obviously, they don't take a loss. I just didn't update this. Georgia Tech wins out, and Louisville wins out. Then what happens? Obviously, Virginia's in. They're undefeated. You would have a head-to-head matchup between Louisville and Georgia Tech. Their common opponents are Pitt, Boston College, Virginia Tech, and Clemson. Obviously, this is only possible if they beat all of those teams. Okay? Then Georgia Tech, it goes to strength of opponent record. Louisville has the best in the conference, and Georgia Tech is out. So those are the scenarios that I've looked at. Obviously, you could look at scenarios where SMU wins out, and then you have SMU, Georgia Tech, and Louisville maybe. All right, just to kind of restate it, the two teams that need the most help with strength of record are Virginia and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech needs FSU to lose all the rest of their games. Virginia wants them to win because they played them. Georgia Tech needs NC State to win a lot. They need Clemson to win a lot. That would help with their strength of record. Those are two teams that don't play Virginia. Virginia played NC State, though it doesn't count. So I'm going to cut it off here, or this will go on forever. But those are just some scenarios I looked at. You could do all of this too. You could assume some things, throw it in Excel, see what the outcomes are. And I guess to finalize, we'll just go over how the tiebreak rules work again. I made a whole video about it. In all these 3-way ties, it goes to combined head-to-head winning percentage. If all the tied teams don't play each other, that gets thrown out, which in none of the scenarios we look at, they do. If all tied teams are not common opponents, then basically, simply stated, one team has to beat all the other teams or lose to all the other teams. That doesn't happen. So in most of these we've looked at, it comes down to either winning percentage against common opponents or your opponent's strength of record. All right. If it's still a tie, then this sports source analytics that isn't public decides it. If by some weird way that didn't decide it, then the conference commissioner or their assistant decides it. So let me know what you think. Are these assumptions reasonable? Is this crazy to you? Who do you think is going to make an ACC title? We'll talk to you guys next time.